As much as we might like the idea of writing a longfic, I do think the very first mistake a writer can make is to choose a premise that just isn't suited to a longer story. The most likely culprit? The one no one suspects? Hello fellow fic writers, kudos for clicking on this video. My name is Cora and I'm here to help you write and post your dream fanfiction. So a few weeks ago I got this anonymous ask on Tumblr. Hi, I just recently came across your videos on YouTube and they've been very helpful as I've started up writing fanfiction again after a couple of years of inactivity. I usually write pretty short fics, 20k words at max, but I've wanted to write something longer for a while now. I was wondering if you could talk a little about how to write long fics at some point, how to come up with a plot, how to get the motivation to write the entire thing, how to edit such a long fic, etc. Hope you're doing really well, and thanks again for the videos. Thanks for the kind words, Anon. Your question is definitely something I know a lot of people are wondering. Longfics are certainly an undertaking, so the best way to do your question justice is not just with one video, but two. Yep, it's a two-parter, and in part one, we are covering the 4 things to consider when coming up with a plot: premise, through lines, POV, and character development. Before we jump into that though, it's time for the Sunday bar notice. Just like we all enjoy different toppings on our Sundays, we all enjoy different things in our fanfics or have a different writing process that works for us. The advice I offer in this video strongly reflects my own preferences, so if you agree, great! If you don't, also great. No matter what though, please think about why you hold these opinions. This channel is all about sharing what works for me, in the hopes that it'll help you figure out what works for you too. Chapter 1, the ideal premise. As much as we might like the idea of writing a longfic, I do think the very first mistake a writer can make is to choose a premise that just isn't suited to a longer story. The most likely culprit? The one no one suspects? Sequel fics, especially if they try to provide a conflict that's very similar to the source material. But why would this be a problem? Think of it this way. If the canon protagonist had to grow from a timid youngster to someone capable of defeating a tyrant, seeing them take on another tyrant is going to be boring. Like, we already know our protagonist is capable of taking them down. Sure, maybe this new tyrant is so powerful that even the protagonist's godlike abilities aren't enough to topple it, but that won't guarantee you an interesting story. How many of us want to read about Aang or Korra from Avatar unlocking some extra special super avatar state? In canon, they've already gone through the internal conflict of finding balance within themselves. What more is there for them to learn in that regard? That's why, if you want to write longfic, you need a premise that allows room for characters to grow and the stakes to raise. If you want to write longfic, especially epic lengths, these are the kinds of premise you should consider. Page 1, retellings. You know how everyone has that one fanfic trope they can't get enough of? This is mine. Retellings are when you tell canon events in fanfiction form. It's kind of like the inverse of adapting a book to film. You can tweak canon events to help them fit your medium, make changes that you think make for a better story, or add missing scenes. If your source material is long, then your retelling will be long. But wait! Didn't I just say that rehashing canon makes for a boring story? In this case, no, because you get to tell a story with these characters before they undergo character development and power creep. It's like rewatching your favorite show, but slightly to the left. That's my left. And with tons of bonus content. Page 2. Canon divergent stories. This is when fanfiction departs from canon at a certain point. For example, what if Zuko joined Team Avatar at the end of season 2? The earlier your story departs from canon, the more room there is for plot and character development. Page 3. Alternate universes. This is when you take the characters from canon and place them in a whole new universe. The universe could be similar aside from a single change, such as a role swap between Link and Zelda from The Legend of Zelda, or something else entirely, such as a coffee shop AU. Page 4. Canon compliant with a catch. Sequel longfics can work if you write a conflict that isn't just a repeat of what canon gave us. My favourite example is a Twilight Princess fanfic called My Roof, My Rules by CTJ, which breaks away from the source material's dungeon crawling, monster slaying plot by focusing on Link's struggles with mental illness, trauma, and personal morality. Even these sequels are better suited to novel-length stuff at most rather than the six-figure epics though. There is, of course, an exception to this. If your source material has an unsatisfying ending or perhaps no ending at all, then of course you have a sequel premise that can follow the same conflict. There's incomplete character arcs, dangling plot threads, and foreshadowing that has yet to be delivered on. It may be an exception, but it proves the rule. So, reckon you have an idea that can carry a long story? Then it's time we talk about Chapter 2, Throughlines. In a Mythcrantz blog post titled The One Big Thing That Most Manuscripts Lack, Chris Winkle writes, "The throughline is the core of the story. Without an obvious throughline, your narrative is just a list of things that happen." Unfortunately, so much longfic, especially epic lengths, fall in this area. The author will cook up some problem that needs to be solved and either resolve it too quickly, let subplots run wild, or drop the plot altogether for a shiny new plot. And then another, with absolutely nothing stringing these conflicts into one. But you know what typically does have a through line? Your canon source material. I hope. You know which fics then have the strongest through lines? Retellings or AUs which loosely follow canon events. Am I saying that your longfic needs to stick within the margins or guidelines of canon to have a good plot? No, I'm just saying it's easier if you do, and it might be a better route to follow if you're not the most confident in your plotting abilities. It can actually teach you how to break down a plot that you love, which will help you figure out how to write your own plots. Remember, retellings are one of my favorite kinds of fic, so you're not a bad writer if you choose this route. If you do want to take your story somewhere completely different, then the key to a strong plot is to have some big problem that needs to be solved, and then have every major plot point contribute to the solution. The original Star Wars trilogy was about taking down an evil galactic empire, so individual plot points ranged from surviving to fight another day to destroying its weapons of mass destruction. Imagine if it got sidetracked with pod races or debt collection. Chapter 3: Characters, Relationships, and Development. Another common issue with longfics, especially if they're sequel fics, is that the characters have already progressed as far as they can regarding personal and relationship development. So sequel fics end up writing the canon characters as flat, or project a bunch of internal struggles onto them that don't feel in character. Sometimes there's room left to address unresolved trauma or get the non-canon couple together, but even then there can be pitfalls. For example, a Twilight Princess sequel fic featuring a slow burn romance between my OTP, Link and Midna, is, in my experience, a bore, because canon already developed a rich and deep relationship between them, one that can be interpreted as a star-crossed romance. If you want them to kiss after their epic adventure in Twilight Princess, you're better off writing a canon divergent one-shot, a missing scene, or a sequel fic where they get together early. This is again why retellings, canon divergent fics, and AUs tend to make for better long fics and epic lengths. You can wipe the board clean of all character and relationship development, and then write it yourself. Regarding the individual character development, you could either focus on characters who don't get much focus in canon, or focus on some aspect of the major characters that the source material never focuses on. For example, if canon involves your main character being stuck in a time loop, why not write a story about that character learning to adapt to time that doesn't reset? Every decision made, every word said, and every action will have permanent, lasting consequences that cannot be erased. That would be hard to ease back into, and make for an excellent story of existentialism. Chapter 4. Choose your POVs carefully. What's one of the most common culprits to cause a long fic to balloon in word count? Too many POVs. All 20 viewpoint characters might be fascinating to you, but if your readers came for a slow burn adoption, they probably resent all 6 of your romantic side plots for stealing the focus away. This can get especially annoying when posting in serialized format. Let's say you post every 2 weeks. Your main character is A, but then you have chapters from B, C, D, and E, each of whom are not interacting with A. By the time we return to A's storyline, 2.5 months have passed in the real world, and the reader forgot what A was even up to. The lesson here is that you should tell your story in as few POVs as possible. If you can tell it in one POV, then tell it in one POV. If you're writing something like enemies to lovers, where you need the reader to understand where each person is coming from, then each person in your ship can have a POV. If you perhaps need an additional POV to reveal something the protagonist would have no knowledge of, but the reader needs to know, then you can have a POV for that too. Just use that POV as sparingly as possible and keep it close to its intended purpose. So now that you have your premise, throughline, and POVs sorted, you now have the ingredients to outline or maybe even draft your long fic. But that's what I'm saving for next week. And that's the end of the video. Kudos for watching, kudos for liking, and extra kudos if you subscribed and hit the bell so you don't miss part 2. I will see you in my next video. But in the meantime, happy fic writing!